This episode of Serverless Chats is sponsored by Dexecure. This week, Rebecca and I chat with Merritt Baer and Megan O'Neill about security in the cloud. This is Serverless Chats, episode number 131. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Daly.
And I'm Rebecca Marshburn.
And this is Serverless Chats. Good morning, Rebecca. How you doing?
Good morning, Jeremy. I'm doing really well. Just taught a yoga class and now about to have a really great conversation about a topic that I'm not going to give away yet. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. And it's funny because we were chatting with these guests before we started recording, and they both own pugs. So apparently that's something that brings them together. I actually just brought my dog. I had to bring my dog to the vet. He has to have surgery. He has lipoma or something like that. It's like a fatty growth that has to be removed. But I think for me, and I don't know if you have pets, but for me, the security of my animals and making sure that they're safe is the number one thing. You know what the number two thing is for me though?
The security of your guests.
No, the security of the cloud and all of my cloud applications.
Serverless technologies?
Oh, somebody just chimed in. It's Merritt Baer. Oh, so here's who we have for guests today. We have two amazing guests from AWS, both who are cybersecurity experts. We have the principal of AWS Office of the CISO, Merritt Baer, and then we also have Principal Security Specialist, SA at AWS, working with customers every day to define their cloud policies. Megan O'Neill, thank you both for being here.
Yes. M&M, the duo.
M&M. Well, both M's. Megan, maybe you first, and then Merritt. Tell us a bit about yourselves and your pugs, and then a little bit more about what you all do at AWS and what your day-to-day is when it comes to securing the cloud.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. My name's Megan O'Neill. I'm a security specialist, SA solution architect at AWS. I've been at AWS for 4 years now, and been in cybersecurity over, I'm going to date myself here, 15 years in security engineering, architecture, previous roles. I actually started my cloud journey as an AWS customer in 2014 for a global retailer based out of Seattle, where I helped them set their cloud security strategy and implement controls. And it was so fun. It was just very organic. A few guys were working on an AWS environment, and they kept coming over to my desk and being like, hey, here's what we're thinking for our AWS VPC, and so we would whiteboard it and threat model it on the fly. And it was so fun to learn AWS. And after a couple months, I was like, hey, do you have an opening on your team? And it was just so organic. I was the first security person on the Cloud Center of Excellence team. And we just kept going from there and building it out. And so I really enjoyed that. And I did that for 4 years before then, working for a large consulting company to help other customers with cloud security across North America. So that's kind of my history. I'm based out of Colorado. I'm in Golden, and we go up skiing all the time. I'm actually learning snowboarding right now, which is painful. That's super fun.
I usually ski around all the snowboarders sitting in the middle of the trail. That's what I do.
That's me. I'm like, why am I doing this? I can ski. Oh, I like a challenge, so I know I can do this. I just can't give up. So yeah, I took a couple of snowboarding lessons last week up at Breckenridge. I was on vacation. It was so fun, but yeah. And then pugs. Yes, I have been a pug owner for 20 years, but
not the same one.
No, another. So I had a black pug. Her name was Indy. She was amazing. And then, I just fell in love with the pug breed. So now I have Rosie. She's 6 years old. She's a fawn pug. She's quite the character. If she was I booted her out of the office, obviously, because if we get any knocks at the doors, she's like, I protect the family. It barks a lot. But she's a character. Yeah. I bring her on every once in a while if it's like an internal meeting, and people love Rosie.
So you're saying that Rosie is also into security?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. She'll tell us if someone's within 20 feet from the house. Yeah.
That's very fitting. That's very fitting.
So Merritt, you are also a pug owner, but you also know some things about security as well.
That is true. We have these things in common. Yes. So I'm a principal in the office of the CISO at AWS, Chief Information Security Officer. So we are as the name would imply, kind of a scaling function for the CISO, who now is CJ Moses, and until recently was Steve Schmidt, who went up to do an umbrella role. And we are doing a mix of things. So we take care of the security of AWS as a shop that runs on AWS. But we talk to customers in CISO to CISO conversations and, helping to establish customer relationships. And then taking the empathy from both of those, we try to inject some security awareness and kind of default behaviors into the ways that our services and products get delivered. Of course, we are a technology company, right? So what we deliver are goods and services. And so making sure that security is embedded and is kind of accounted for, which increasingly in cloud is not just clean code, right? It's also
Right.
architectural decisions. It's how will customers interact with this, and how does this interact with other services? I came from U.S. government about 4 years ago, actually almost exactly 4 years ago. And yeah, I have worked in all three branches in government. And yes, big Pug fan and also big rescue fan. Mine is whatever, conglomerate of Puggy things.
So you've been in cybersecurity. You said that you came about 4 years ago from the government, but I think you were there as well for at least 4 years. So you've been in cybersecurity for, I think, at least 8 years, if I do my math right. So maybe we can just start with an overview of the current security landscape. Like, what do you think is the same as 8 years ago? What's changed? How much more sophisticated have attackers become? Where do you usually start to level set the field around what security is today and where it's come from?
Yeah, so I was the same year as Mark Zuckerberg, an undergrad at Harvard. I made the cardinal mistake of graduating, very unhip these days. But it was very evident to me that like these questions around how we want to live were going to be important, and especially the relationship between, companies, governments, and citizen consumers. And that security was one of these ways that we define those perimeters, right? And, literally and metaphorically. And so I've been in security world for, eons. But I think that the reason that I care is that there are high stakes around how we construct those relationships, which are really intimate and increasingly intimate. So, to kind of lead into your second part there about, what the threat landscape looks like now, of course, we could talk about like what current amplification attacks are taking shape or what, but like, I think ultimately what I see is that there's a lot of luxury in the way that we interact with threats today versus the kind of like server babysitting we had to do 15 years ago. And the cloud is a big part of that. So of course, there are always risks. I mean, like any technology is human made. And I mean, I could easily say man made because there is a lot of that too, right? But as which I say deliberately, as in there are going to be imperfections, there are going to be corners not seen and things not, that's sort of like the beauty and the project of working in tech and in security is the knowledge that like there is no perfection. We are in this process driven journey. But at the same time, I think that the kinds of things we see in security today, if you are in a digital transformation, which I hope folks are, as we increasingly believe that folks are moving to the cloud, it's a matter of when, not if, but that folks are interacting with their kind of threat modeling in a way that is increasingly codified. So you're able to do infrastructure as code. And by that, I mean, CloudFormation templates or Terraform or what have you, that then allow you to embrace this kind of ephemerality and immutability that then allow you to do seamless backups and do auto remediations. And that then allow you to reason about what you have constructed. And so you are doing security as code because you are doing infrastructure as code. And those are things that like, I mean, even just the ability to have really tactical and knowledgeable insights around your formations, like that at one point required you to go around and do manual checks everywhere. And now you can reason about those. And there are tools for that too. We have an automated reasoning group, for example, that uses formal methods. But that's just one example of the ways in which I think as we look at security from a landscape perspective, we get a lot of luxuries now to be working in those higher layers of the stack and to be doing, infrastructure and therefore security as code.
Yeah, and Megan, you said you didn't want to date yourself, but I was reading like ethical hacking books back in like 1997, so a long time ago. And I for the longest time maintained my own co-location facility where I had servers, and I was doing all of that stuff, and it was horrible, and I hated it. But it was also a good learning experience, especially the number of times that we did have attacks that we had to mitigate at some point. But I'm just curious because I think Merritt, you mentioned some really interesting things there about the ephemerality of it, but also there's this whole thing about the elasticity of the cloud, right? And so now if something gets compromised, it's not taking down somebody's Linux server in a co-location facility somewhere. It's potentially being able to launch thousands and thousands of instances across, 25 regions or whatever AWS has now, or whatever other cloud vendor you're using. So I'm just curious that the amount of, or that attack vector, I guess the scale of it, like where have you seen from 15 years ago when you first started, sort of where you are now, like the threat of that scale, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny too, because when you said, back in the day, having, figuring out attacks or like seeing those attacks within like a colo facility, I remember I used to manage firewalls for a large company, and we would literally, if there was like a DDoS attack, just all the CPUs on the firewalls would go up to like 97%, and we would literally cross our fingers like, please don't go down. And today it's like it's much different, right? If you're seeing like a DDoS attack on a system in the cloud, for example, and you maybe don't have DDoS protections there, what does that look like? Of course, DDoS protections are available, so I would always recommend that customers have that in place. But actually spinning things up, it can, if you have an unmonitored region, for example, and for example, you don't have your threat detections enabled, so you're not seeing unusual behavior. They'll maybe find the biggest instances that will run Bitcoin mining, for example, but that's like
Right.
worst case scenario. Obviously, we don't want to see customers experience anything like that, and we have many services that help them to prevent those types of attacks. And actually, a lot of it is education and like what types of policies you can put in place to only allow specific regions to operate. So,
Yeah.
developers can't accidentally pop in a different region in the console and start building and then be like, oh, I shouldn't be in that region, or no one can do that, right? So it's almost like setting up those guardrails to make sure that type of stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think so. Meg alluded to a couple services that are probably worth saying out loud. One is AWS Shield, which can protect and absorb DDoS attacks with what feels like limitless flexibility. And then the other is GuardDuty, which has crypto mining indicators. So like if you haven't turned on GuardDuty, do it. Folks frequently ask me for Amazon's like custom threat intel. And the answer is you have it. It's in GuardDuty.
Right.
You're consuming it today, hopefully. Like it doesn't make any sense from a financial perspective to be Bitcoin mining in AWS unless you're having someone else foot the bill. So, make sure that you are putting actions on those GuardDuty findings. And as Meg alludes to, like, that regional flexibility is a huge enabler for businesses. I always have a little bit of, and I'm not poking at you specifically, Jeremy, but I have like a pet peeve around people taking what are technologies that matter a lot for, availability, which by the way is one of the CIA triad, and saying, but isn't this a security compromise? Like, yeah, did you want to do business? I mean,
Right.
sure, there are ways it can be weaponized, but like, let's look at how we minimize that risk and meanwhile appreciate that it actually gives us a lot of flexibility to get stuff done.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I'm not suggesting, I mean, the whole point of infinite scalability or close to it is the magic of the cloud, right? So of course there are going to be bad actors that take advantage of it. But like the other thing maybe you didn't mention was like, is it control tower, and you can do the SCPs, the service control policy. So you can just basically say you can't spin up anything in this particular region or something like that, which I think is super helpful as well.
Control tower helps you establish your footprint essentially, but AWS organizations, I think, is what you're thinking of, where you can have SCPs that you delegate down, and increasingly actually not necessarily down, but flat. You can delegate thou shalt nots around. So for example, open resources or whatever. And you can, of course, always use tagging and ABAC, attribute-based access control via tagging to enforce those and to codify them, right? Because what we're really talking about are things written in whatever, JSON or other kinds of codification languages that say, I want to see if someone needs to do this, they need to ask me for an exception. And there's kind of this healthy friction and then unhealthy friction between dev teams and security teams, right? And I think healthy friction is like, tell me why you need it, because I don't think it should be available to everyone. Or I'm seeing that this team is bumping up against this guardrail all the time. Maybe our guardrails are out of whack. Our security metrics point to this being a pain point. And unhealthy friction is just the security team being like, we don't like it. It makes our life a little harder, and we don't care that your business goals are different, right? So I think there's, I think healthy friction is always intended to be there.
So I wish we usually don't play the videos, but I almost feel like we have to, because I wish listeners could have seen when both Megan and Merritt, you said the same, what was that attribute? You said it at the same time.
Access control. Yeah.
Yeah, you both looked at each other through this digital camera, and then you both nodded at the same time, like, I got you. So let's talk about making choices around services and resources. And this is also making choices around job functions and role focuses. And I think it gets to that idea around friction, or where it exists and doesn't. And sometimes, like, developing the code and securing the code is like one person's job, and maybe it just should not be. And before we get there, there's a quote, Merritt, that you are well known for saying, if it's not someone's job, then it's a hope, and hope is not a plan. And I have to say, I had not heard this quote before around hope not being a plan until 2 days ago. In our VP of product at the company I work at, Common Room, we were talking about, releasing a feature, and she was like, and hope is not a plan. So we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And honestly, the chat went people were like, what a quote. That quote is lit. Wow. Like, that's a great quote to start off the morning. Hope is not a plan. So it's been really great to hear that twice. And I wonder now if my VP of product has borrowed it from you, and I'm going to ask her.
Wow. I take very little credit for it. I think it's kind of an Amazonianism, because I have also heard it from Eric Brandwein, and that's usually who I attribute it to. But I think the idea is that good intentions are not enough. That, we believe that humans are, as Anne Frank would say, inherently good at heart or something, but that's not enough, right? That ultimately there needs to be mechanisms to get the job done, and that mechanisms allow us to also scale and to be able, because we can not only be able to hand over to the next person sort of a playbook of what we've been working on, but also to allow us to automate away. Because if it's a mechanism so for example, our SIM system, initially, every SIM gets answered by a human, and then increasingly it gets answered by a robot. Because we realize that there are things we can automate away. And then meanwhile, we hire people who love automation, security engineers who can code, which often means we hire devs to be security engineers, which means that one of their, goals is to never close a trouble ticket until you've scripted a remediation, if it can be scripted. So it becomes this one of the big questions I get is like, how do I build a culture of innovation, a culture of security, a culture of, and it's like, you build a culture of what you repeatedly do. Culture is what you do on purpose over time. And I think, if you want to do those behaviors, then you exhibit them, and the way to exhibit them is to create mechanisms to encourage and foster and kind of, grow those.
Yeah. And so I love this idea of like, you're talking about how hiring developers who then become security engineers at times, right? They hold they wear both those hats, I guess, if you will, or they merge into one. And I think this goes back to some recent conversations we've had with guests, like our last guest, Tom McLaughlin, was talking about developers doing all sorts of things and like, yeah. And like he was talking about, dev and ops, and then you mash them together in their DevOps, and they need to make a lot of choices around services and resources. And then the security of their applications depends on it. And so I'm wondering what you think about, what both of you, Megan and Merritt, think about, especially as you're seeing probably customers work through this in their cloud policies, how you think about the level of power and or burden that's on developers when it comes to building apps that are performant, reliable, and secure. What are some of the safeguards they should be thinking about if there, was a time when they weren't in charge of security, but now they're in charge of like app from end to end? And also, how do they build in all those things? So not just coding and then like throwing it over the wall and someone else is securing it. It's all those things in one. And so, yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about like how you see this happening in the real world, and whether or not it's the right amount of like mental air quote burden to put on someone, or how you're seeing that play out in real life?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a bit of a burden there, but I think there doesn't have to be. And this is where, back in the day when I was a customer initially of AWS, as a security person, not the developer, I was like, okay, there's one person like at this company that is now responsible for security that's on this like CCOE team. So how do I scale my knowledge? And I immediately went to, well, the crawl, walk, run. I'm going to create a checklist so that developers can self-service their own security assessments. And so we can be super transparent with the requirements. So I think part of lowering the developer burden initially is just being transparent around what are the requirements that are out there that we expect as security practitioners them to get right. And then what are like building out an internal wiki of what does good look like? What does bad look like? Why is this bad? Because we can't assume that they all have security background. Most of them don't. And then how do you do that in cloud, right? And what, for example, an AWS security group is very similar to a firewall. It's a stateful source destination port protocol. Many of them don't know IP addresses. So opening things up to the world, for example. So I think starting with those requirements, being transparent, and then codifying, and Merritt's mentioned this multiple times, is like setting those guardrails so that those accidental things, they're not like meaning to open things up or meaning to make public resources. It's usually by accident. So like, let's enable our environment as security practitioners so that that cannot happen. For the most part, some of the high risk things can't happen with things like service control policies, not allowing those type of changes within the environment in AWS. And then what I would love to see more development teams do is create a library of common security patterns. For example, authentication authorization for, serverless, for example, Lambda authorizers, that sort of thing, that have been approved and reviewed by the security team where it's possible, and that are known good practices, that so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and just continue to build out those libraries and code, and literally in a code repository, so that, other folks, maybe juniors or folks that are new to cloud, have something so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think the more we continue to build that type of developer experience out so that the easy thing is the right thing to do, it is going to make, everyone's job easier and less security issues, in the future.
Exactly. I think we sometimes use the phrase like making the secure thing to do the easy thing to do, which is hard, it turns out. But I always think, and of course, never, like, this is no victim blaming, but every time that an entity says like, oh, well, an intern did that, it's like, why would the intern have privileges? That's on you. There needs to be leadership. There needs to be guardrails. There needs to be paved roads. There should be, it's not to say that you won't have a bad day. We all have bad days, and we have mechanisms to look at what happened and whether it was a known risk, an unknown, an accepted risk, an unaccepted, and get better over time, right? You solve problems, one piece at a time. But I do think that, something Meg's getting at here is this like need for leadership in terms of, I think sometimes we see folks kind of shy away from the technical mechanisms that are very available to them to enforce their, literal dicta. Like, if you believe in math, code will run. And so there's this beauty in the ability to, delegate those down. And meanwhile, I think, Rebecca, you mentioned, hiring devs to be security people, which I think is a brilliant practice. And frankly, like, who are security people? They're people who like to do security. Like, it's time to embrace a very broad view of what a security person is, looks like, comes from, does, because we are all security people. But I also think that, there's a deliberate delegating down and democratization that we employ, for example, in our, I always, the DevSecOps is sort of like the cybersecurity as a term where like everyone hates it and no one has a better version. But in
It's
our,
like the term serverless.
serverless. Yes. And if I get one more clever person saying it's someone else's servers or someone else's computer is the cloud, like, okay. But, at the same time, there is a real, there is an articulation of that manifests in the real world, right? And it takes the form of having your dev teams deliver with security embedded in what you do. Like, and I think it is inherently wedded to this transformation of cloud because you're talking about software layers. So you're talking about folks who are architecting. And, as much as we think that the console is not being used, it's sort of like the perimeter, right? The console is dead, long live the console. Folks are clicking a button to spin up resources in a region in Sydney, and or they are, copy and pasting code that they know has created fairly secure configurations from their previous, Terraform stuff. And, like they're taking advantage of the economies of scale that you get when you're working in these software layers. And I think that is a beauty. Like, yes, there are obviously inherent risks with all of that, but the risk is the convenience and vice versa. And I think that is actually a really good way. And what we do internally is we have right now, it's like a 1-to-8 ratio in our, 2 pizza teams that are doing those deliverables, the dev teams. We have a security person embedded in there. And what we have found is you don't have to hire a person who says they've been in security for 15 years like Meg and I. You just hire or have a smart person and you say, you're going to be wearing a security hat. So every time that they try to create an internet-facing endpoint, you're going to be the one who goes, ah! Or if you see a star policy, you're going to go, And you know what? Everyone can do it. Like, it is not some kind of like kiss, the stone that makes you a security person. You think through with that sort of like head, and that's how we confront this as an area of work that will always be a pursuit.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the need for leadership, but I also think, the need for education is huge. So whether that's, just cloud in general or, dev, cybersecurity, whatever term that you dislike there, it's again, totally understand that, especially when people would say like anything with the word cyber in it. I never really like that. Hi, everyone. I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, DexSecure. DexSecure empowers web developers by automating tasks that are essential for every website, freeing up developer time to focus on building. DexSecure currently has 3 products to help your team. Their Web Asset Optimizer optimizes content like HTML, images, CSS, JavaScript, fonts, videos, and more. Their third-party optimizer takes care of all your third-party assets, and their Intelligent Network Optimizer enhances the performance and resiliency of your website. DexSecure also has an open source product called OpenDexSecure, a cloud-agnostic edge development framework. Now, what I love about OpenDex is that the developers can jump straight into product building and not worry about dealing with setup and all the other roadblocks that come from the complexity and configurations of other popular CDNs. If you're interested in trying DexSecure's products, you can for free. Just visit DexSecure's website at dexsecure.com to sign up and learn more. That's DEXECURE.com. So when you start thinking about people getting into this field or somebody coming from the dev, a dev role into a security role or something like that, something I heard you say on another podcast somewhere was like sort of your pet peeve for acronyms, which I am sort of the same way. I mean, we joked before when we were saying ABAC, but I think for new people coming into any type of new function or new role or something that has a little slightly different context to it, acronyms are really, really hard. We joked before, like, a marketing person saying SQL and meaning sales qualified leads as opposed to structured query language, and that becoming very confusing. But I'm just curious, and maybe both of you could take a shot at answering this, but if you are new into cybersecurity, or you're a dev and you want to get into this sort of role, like what are the first steps? Like, where's the education there? Where's that path for you?
I'll take this one first and let Meg put the foot stomp on it, since she has, as she kind of alluded to earlier, really good real life. I've always been the security person in the room, and I think that one of the things that I love doing, I think that one of the reasons I am a security person is that I love doing that part where I talk to smart people trying to get stuff done. And then I help shape their understanding of what I'm looking for in the world. But I think that this is where, I guess from my perspective, there is every CISO who I talk to complains of a talent shortage. And I think they just aren't looking with the same eyes. Like they're super smart, interesting, qualified folks, who, could take advantage of resources, who you could develop internally, who, like, especially in cloud, even if you have a computer science degree, it's probably not going to have an AWS aspect, or maybe today
Right.
it does, but it definitely didn't 10 years ago. Like,
I don't think it does anymore. Yeah, or I
right?
still don't think it does. Yeah.
I think there are so many interesting folks who, and I have made it deliberate in my world to, and we'll give my contact info throughout this, but I'm happy. This is also my little call to arms. Like, feel free to reach out to me personally. I will refer you for Amazon jobs. I will brainstorm other things in my network. If you were an artist or an architect or a first grade teacher, if you are not a, typical profile of who shows up in tech, like, great, we need you. Just remember that the landscape of what we have constructed here is sort of like thought skeletons from people who came before, who, like, and as incredible as the internet is, like, this is not like a black hole that, NASA is like, this is out here, whether we know about it or not. No, we are building these, and we are the ones who are, constructing some of these kinds of limits or lack thereof, right? And I think there's a lot of sweetness in recognizing, like, who but we. So from a security hiring perspective, I think, the water is warm, and it's really critical that we have diverse and kind of misanthropic thinkers of all kinds, who are ready to get in and question why things are done that way, while still recognizing that this is a business enabler. But I think that there is just so much room, whether you're a dev today or you want to be a dev tomorrow, to help build yourself up, and also, if you are in a leadership position now, to be able to think through avenues to upskill folks who work for you, and hire folks who may look different or not have gone through the rituals that you would expect before they get hired by you.
Yeah. No, I love that, Merritt. I think, the other aspect of it is, well, what you already mentioned is that, if you're a curious person and you like, you're analyzing a problem, we're just analyzing problems and trying to solve these problems, right? And I think a lot of the things I've done is like, I came out with a computer science degree in 2004, right? And then I did all this other work when a new problem was set in front of me, and it's just like dig in and read about it. Like, PCI, what the heck is PCI? I actually opened up the payment card industry data security standard and read the whole thing front to back. And then it's like, when you actually get down to it and start talking about it, it's actually up to the interpretation of the assessor when you're going through these on-site assessments. So it's making sure that you're educating yourself and diving into some of these problems, and you just learn so much through that. And through mentorship, I've had mentors my entire career, and I think that's really helped a lot too. And it's just, how do we break down these problems and try and learn more and dive deeper into them so that we have a really good understanding of them? I've been working with Merritt. She's been mentoring me this past year, and it's been so great just to see, we do things differently. She has a different approach to things, and it's really opened my eyes and helped me. And it's also empowering when you have a mentor, because I feel like you have someone to talk to if you don't know how to solve a problem. And especially in COVID times, oh my gosh, we feel so isolated, right? And so when you have someone that you can, do a quick flight out to Miami and do a recording with and chat about it, it makes the tough stuff seem that much more fun and exciting, keeps you interested in your job, and you just learn so much more. So definitely recommend getting a mentor through the process, and just don't be scared of the hard stuff. Dive in, read the specs, read the GDPR spec. Like, seriously, it's not as complicated as you would think. And then as you're reading these things, you're going to have questions. So you can just, jump on a Slack channel with your mentor and be like, hey, how do you see customers approach this problem? And, the dialogue continues, right?
Well, congratulations for making it through that PCI document, because the first time I went through PCI compliance, I think I fell asleep like 6 times trying to read through
I mean,
it.
that's the thing, right? Reading documents.
Maybe
is
I'm just not as
boring.
excited about it, but it's good that we have people that are excited like you.
I think Meg's point is, look, these were just written by other humans who may not
Yeah.
even be smarter than you. You know what I mean? Like, it's, and meanwhile, when, I think Meg and I love to work together because steel sharpens steel. Like, we were never I was never assigned to mentor her. It was just like, we get stronger when we learn from each other, like being willing to say, I would love to hear what you think about this or how you would approach this will help a person to, feel even more empowered that maybe you were onto something. And I think, although we're, I guess, doubling down on this, like, there's a lot around security that feels sort of secretive or intimidating. I encourage folks to just remember, again, everyone had to learn it at some time. And also, some of this stuff that's super fascinating, like cryptography, like the pyramids and the stars, and like, these are things that we have, wrestled with that are worth falling in love with. Like, there's a lot of beauty there too. It is not just sort of unsolvable problems. It's really kind of inspiring and igniting.
I was actually sort of on the other side of, I was like, wow, you're making this sound really fun rather than boring. It's almost that good. It's almost that way when sometimes you read a book and you think maybe that book is boring, and then you have, a teacher or a mentor or a friend that says like, oh, but did you read it in this way, or did you notice this part? And then you're like, wow, that is really cool. And it totally opens up that it actually can be that you're reading it in a way that was boring, but it's because of the voice in your head rather than seeing it for what it is. So anyway, I'm kind of sold. So you said the water is warm, and also hopefully the servers are warm. And with that in mind, we only have about 10 minutes, so I want to dive into a little bit about serverless itself. And the initial move to cloud was followed by all this like fear, uncertainty, like FUD around security. And honestly, that still exists, I think, in a lot of ways. And then perhaps with each new paradigm, new security concerns are raised. And so I'm wondering how you've seen trust in the security of the cloud change over time, and then how you've seen trust and security in the serverless corners of the cloud change over time since it was introduced at the end of 2014.
So I think one of the things that I try to do in CISO to CISO conversations is remind them of all the stuff they had to worry about before. All the things that they inherit from us or whomever their cloud provider is. But in particular, I know about AWS's practices, right? So for example, our Nitro architecture, where you've got basically like a hypervisorless hypervisor. There is no way to do things with, remote code execution or side channel attacks or other that, like, there are beauties from a security perspective, not to mention the unprecedented uptime, the ability to do, patching without any downtime. Like, there are things that we have invested in for years that are now just part of what you feel but don't think about, I would say, from a security perspective. And frankly, even just inheritances that are how our platform operates. So your security services like GuardDuty and Security Hub and WAF that we've alluded to are obvious, security inheritances in the sense that you can consume those and get security benefits. But even looking at something like, backup and restore, at the ability to clone databases and consider that a canary, at the ability, like, there's so much sweetness that comes along with the ability to construct and really have your focus be architectural instead of, and I guess this will sound odd, but instead of code-based, right? Like, we have written the services. They go through our AppSec process. They go through all these things to then be delivered. And so, you alluded earlier, Rebecca, to like, folks who used to create software and throw it over the fence, right? That's just not true for cloud. Like, what we're selling are actually the services themselves. And so there is not this like good luck. The shared responsibility model exists because we don't know what you're doing with your data because it's deliberate that we don't look at content layers. That's why KMS has no VendMe or plain text keys button. Like, that was on purpose. But at the same time, there are ways that we hope to, as Meg alluded to, educate folks so that they are building security. We definitely care intimately about that. And so I think as we move into, so serverless is kind of one of those inheritances, right? Because you now are dealing with codification of what you're working on instead of having to deal with the kind of like literal mass of it. And we see folks embracing serverless for all sorts of things, right? For billing, benefits, but also for availability, for remediations. Your Alexa is powered by a Lambda function, and you can write those raw. You can grab them off GitHub. There's a lot of packagedness and then a lot of accessibility around if you want to tailor those for yourself. And so I think there's a lot of beauty in that. And of course, it's imperfect. All technologies are, as we have, referenced. But I think there's a lot of promise as we move into this kind of, or are already moving into this kind of like, software defined and software, which means codified, defined kind of world. There's so much room for promise there.
Yeah, I love that. And I think when I talk to customers and I've seen like the transformation happen, first starting AWS 4 years ago, a lot of it was just customers not being educated or not knowing some of the common patterns out there that they can use. And so a lot of it is education. A lot of it's like, I think what a game changer for me personally back when I was a customer was attending reInvent, because all that is sharing those common patterns. And just actually was really cool. I went to some sessions where it was actually AWS security up on stage talking about how they do threat detection at scale, which talk about scale when you're Amazon, and AWS. And they're sharing the details of implementation. They shared that they hire developers, like, what we were talking about earlier, folks that were interested in security, but that could build the systems because you have to build them yourself. A lot of those commercial products don't necessarily scale to the size that, we need. And that really helped me educate me on some of the things, how to think outside of the box on how to tackle some of these security problems or, serverless.
Nick, was that a box metaphor?
I mean, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. That's good. And I think the other thing there is like that's literally my job as a security specialist, solutions architect is, I actually right before this got off of a call where we talked to the CISO and it's like, hey, what are you guys working on? What are your concerns? What are you struggling with? They don't have to pay me. Seriously, I'm a free resource to customers. Now I do have to scale across, North America, but my job is to literally work with customers, help them get through concerns. And some of that is education. Like, what are the best practices for this? Hey, we have this issue. Oh, we didn't realize this service could do this. And so a lot of it is education. And I love to also see, customers open sourcing tools that they've built to solve some of these problems. That's just, again, creates more patterns that are available for other customers to solve these challenges as well.
Awesome. All right. So we're basically out of time. I feel like I honestly have maybe like 300 more questions for you, but we're going to have to just limit it to one more. And so I think we've talked about a lot of things. I think we mentioned Audit Trail, WAF. We mentioned a couple other things, Lambda. You mentioned automated remediation scripts, things like that. So just quickly, what are maybe the top 5 tools or whatever, the top tools that somebody building an app, a serverless app on AWS, what are the top security tools that they should use? Just throw it out there quickly.
Meg, go ahead.
GuardDuty, CloudTrail, Security Hub, Identity and Access Management.
I'm going to be one of those annoying people who refuses to answer the question you asked, but answers a different one. I mean, step 1 is maybe use a managed service, right? Like just have us manage it for you. Step 2 is think about they probably won't even notice all the serverless, right? EventBridge is CloudWatch, doing Lambdas under the hood. Config rules is config doing Lambdas under the hood. Lambdas you can write yourself, there are all these ways that I think the real core is 1, taking advantage of managed services and be conscious of where your responsibilities lie in the stack. And 2, automation, right? And that takes various forms, but it's going to ultimately be Lambdas under the hood, but it'll feel seamless to you. And that's the beauty of a lot of this, is that you don't have to reinvent that wheel.
Megan, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's great.
Well, before we release everyone back into building very secure applications and building a very secure cloud, wanted to understand where listeners can learn more about each of you, Merritt and Megan. And then also, of course, we'll put these in the show notes. And Merritt, if you want to talk a little bit about, Tech and Roses and, giving back to women in tech and what it is. And we'll also put that in the show notes as well.
Sure. Yes, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Feel free to contact me. I'm on Twitter at Merritt Baer. And yes, I worked on building what I call an expert network of women in technology, which is intentionally supposed to kind of allow us to ask hard questions around, whether to take this job, whether we can upskill ourselves, how to ask for more pay, those kinds of questions for, senior career folks. So if you're someone who's interested, feel free to reach out to me. As you can tell, it's something that I feel passionately about. And I think while really strong inroads is important, we have more avenues for junior folks and fewer for senior folks to be able to talk to each other. So that was where I wanted that to play in. And shout out to Deborah Lathan, who co-founded that with me, who is a queen. So thanks so much for having us. And I'm happy to share my contact info afterwards.
Awesome. And Megan, you?
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here. And, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that this, gets other folks out there motivated to maybe dip their toes in the security pool and join us. I'm on LinkedIn, Megan O'Neill, O''Neil. Definitely please reach out. I'm here to help folks as well. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. And thanks again.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
And that's this week's Serverless Chat. Rebecca and I want to give a huge thank you to Merritt Baer and Megan O'Neill for being our guests this week, and to our sponsor, DexSecure. If you want to check out the show notes and a full transcript of this episode, you can find them at serverlesschats.com/131. For more Serverless Chat, subscribe, sign up to be an insider, check us out on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can connect with Rebecca on Twitter at Becca Odelay and me at Jeremy_Daily. And if you want to keep up to date on everything serverless, make sure you subscribe to the Off by None newsletter at offbynone.io. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with all of you again next week.